The sun blazed mercilessly over the empty stretch of Georgia highway. Ethan Reynolds slammed his hands on the steering wheel, the sound of his flat tire thumping like a mocking heartbeat. He stepped out, the heat wrapping around him like a suffocating blanket. He checked his phone. No service. Perfect. Just perfect. His suit jacket was already damp with sweat, and he could feel his patience slipping away. He crouched by the shredded tire, glaring at it as if it could fix itself. "This isn't happening," he muttered. Ethan, the man who closed multi-million-dollar deals, was utterly powerless against a piece of broken rubber. As he stood, frustration bubbling over, a figure appeared in the distance. Ethan shielded his eyes from the sun. A boy? Walking alone on this deserted road? The kid, no older than 14, strode up confidently. His faded t-shirt clung to him, and his sneakers had clearly seen better days, but his smile was unwavering. "You look like you're in trouble," the boy said casually. "Need some help?" Ethan blinked, unsure how to respond. "You know how to change a tire?" "Yep. My dad taught me before he passed." "Got a spare?" The boy's hands moved with practiced efficiency, loosening bolts and lifting the spare tire like he'd done this 100 times. Ethan, who usually directed others, stood helplessly watching. 15 minutes later, the boy wiped his hands on his jeans and stepped back. "There you go, all set." Ethan reached for his wallet, pulling out a crisp $100 bill. "Here, kid, thanks." But the boy shook his head firmly. "Nah, I didn't do it for money. Just wanted to help." Ethan froze, the bill hanging awkwardly in the air. He'd never encountered anyone who didn't want something in return. "Why?" Ethan finally asked. The boy shrugged, his smile unwavering. "Because it's the right thing to do." And just like that, he walked away, disappearing into the shimmering heat. Ethan climbed back into his car, staring at the rearview mirror, watching the boy's figure grow smaller and smaller until it vanished. He didn't know it yet, but that boy's simple act of kindness was about to unravel everything Ethan thought he knew about the world and himself. Ethan drove in silence, his thoughts tangled like the heat waves rising off the asphalt. Jaden's words, "because it's the right thing to do," played on repeat in his mind, gnawing at his carefully constructed worldview. For years, Ethan had operated under one principle: nobody did anything for free. It was how he survived, thrived, and conquered. And yet, here was a boy who dismantled that belief in under 15 minutes with nothing but a wrench and a smile. As his car glided through the city streets back to his penthouse, Ethan found himself lost in memories of his journey to wealth. He hadn't started life with a silver spoon, quite the opposite. Ethan Reynolds grew up in a rundown neighborhood on the outskirts of Atlanta, where the only constants were the sound of overdue rent notices hitting the door and his mother's weary footsteps as she worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. His father had left when Ethan was 7, leaving behind broken promises and a weight of responsibility Ethan wasn't ready to carry. At 18, he vowed to never live like that again. College wasn't an option, but grit and determination were free. He worked 3 jobs, saved every dollar, and hustled harder than anyone around him. By 25, he'd launched his first company, and by 30, he was a self-made millionaire. Success became his armor, protecting him from the vulnerability of his past. But success had its price. His single-minded drive left little room for relationships. Friends who couldn't keep up were left behind, and romantic connections fizzled out as partners realized his money couldn't fill the void in his heart. Even his mother, the one person he had wanted to protect, had grown distant. "You've built walls so high, no one can climb them, not even me," she had told him during one of their rare conversations. At the time, Ethan dismissed her words as dramatics. Now they echoed in his mind with an ache he couldn't ignore. Back at his penthouse, Ethan poured himself a glass of scotch and stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlanta skyline. He had everything he'd ever dreamed of: wealth, power, freedom. Yet, staring at the glittering city below, he felt hollow. The boy on the road had unlocked something in him, a long-buried sense of curiosity and shame. When was the last time he had done something without expecting anything in return? The question lingered unanswered, gnawing at the edges of his mind. His phone buzzed on the countertop, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a calendar reminder about tomorrow's board meeting, another high-stakes negotiation with millions of dollars on the line. Normally the thought would excite him, but tonight it felt distant, almost irrelevant. Instead, his mind was back on that dusty road, on the boy who had walked away without taking anything except a piece of Ethan's carefully built armor. Setting his glass down, Ethan grabbed his keys. He had built his fortune by following his instincts, and right now, those instincts were telling him to go back, to find Jaden. He didn't know what he was looking for or why it felt so urgent, but he knew one thing: he wasn't done with this story yet. As the elevator descended to the parking garage, Ethan felt a strange sensation, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't guilt or obligation, but something deeper. Curiosity? Hope? He couldn't name it, but it pulled at him, driving him forward like a tide he couldn't resist. He started the engine of his sleek Mercedes and merged onto the highway, leaving behind the glittering skyline of Atlanta. The road ahead stretched long and empty, the hum of the engine steady beneath him. For years, his journey had always been about reaching the next goal, the next success. Tonight, it was different. Tonight, Ethan wasn't chasing wealth or power, he was chasing something he didn't yet understand. Jaden's face appeared in his mind, his grin so genuine, his words so simple. Because it's the right thing to do. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Why couldn't he let it go? Why did this boy's kindness feel like a challenge, like it had exposed something raw and vulnerable within him? The miles blurred together as Ethan replayed the scene in his head, searching for answers he couldn't find. All he knew was that he needed to find Jaden again. He needed to understand what had driven the boy to help, what kind of world he lived in that fostered such selflessness. And maybe, just maybe, Ethan needed to understand what it meant for himself. As the highway narrowed into a rural road, the towering cityscape faded into open fields and clusters of small, weathered homes. The air was still, heavy with the scent of grass and distant rain. Ethan slowed as he approached the spot where he had first met Jaden. The memory was vivid now, the sun glaring off the hood of his car, the heat pressing down like a weight, and then Jaden's easy smile cutting through it all. He pulled over, stepping out of the car, his shoes crunching on the gravel. Ahead, a small house came into view, its roof sagging slightly, its paint peeling in streaks to reveal the wood underneath. A rusted mailbox leaned crookedly by the road, and a lopsided swing set stood in the yard, its chain swaying faintly in the breeze. This must be it, Ethan murmured to himself. His heart pounded, though he wasn't sure why. He had faced hostile boardrooms, closed impossible deals, and navigated a world of relentless ambition. Yet here he was, nervous at the thought of knocking on the door of a modest home in the middle of nowhere. Squaring his shoulders, Ethan walked up the uneven path and knocked. The sound echoed, sharp and foreign against the stillness. After a moment, the door creaked open, revealing a woman with tired eyes and a cautious expression. "Yes?" she asked, her gaze flicking to his expensive shoes and tailored blazer. "I'm looking for Jaden," Ethan said, his voice softer than usual. "He helped me a few days ago, changed my tire. I wanted to thank him properly." The woman's posture stiffened slightly, her hand gripping the doorframe. "What's your name?" "Ethan Reynolds," he replied, offering a small, tentative smile. "I owe him a debt of gratitude." At that moment, Jaden appeared from behind his mother, his face lighting up when he recognized Ethan. "Hey, mister, you found us." The tension in the air eased slightly as Jaden's enthusiasm broke through his mother's wary demeanor. She glanced back at her son, then at Ethan, her expression softening just enough to gesture for him to step inside. "Come on in," she said cautiously. Ethan crossed the threshold, stepping into a world so different from his own. The house was small but tidy, filled with mismatched furniture that carried an air of resilience. A faint aroma of something baking in the oven filled the space, mingling with the hum of a distant fan. On the mantel, a faded photograph caught Ethan's attention, a younger Jaden perched on the shoulders of a tall man, both grinning broadly. "That's my dad," Jaden said, noticing Ethan's gaze. His tone was casual, but the weight behind his words was palpable. "He taught me how to fix tires and stuff. He passed away last year." Ethan turned to the boy, his throat tightening. "I'm sorry to hear that." Jaden shrugged, his resilience shining through. "It's okay. Mom says we just gotta keep moving forward." Ethan nodded slowly, the boy's quiet strength striking a chord within him. As they settled around the small kitchen table, Ethan felt something shift. He had come here to repay a debt, but now he realized he might be here to learn something far more important. Ethan settled into one of the mismatched chairs at the kitchen table, feeling oddly out of place in his expensive blazer against the modest backdrop of Jaden's home. The table was scratched from years of use, but it carried a warmth that made it feel alive, unlike the sleek, impersonal furniture in his penthouse. Jaden's mother, Carla, moved with quiet efficiency, setting a pitcher of water on the table before sitting down across from Ethan. "So," she said, her tone cautious but polite, "you came all the way out here to thank my son?" "Yes," Ethan replied, his voice earnest. "Jaden helped me when I was stranded. He didn't have to, but he did. I wanted to return the favor." Carla raised an eyebrow, her lips pressing into a thin line. "We're not the kind of people who take handouts, Mr. Reynolds." "It's not a handout," Ethan said, leaning forward slightly. "It's gratitude. Your son reminded me that not everything in life has to be transactional." Jaden, who had been quietly sipping a glass of water, looked up and grinned. "That's what my dad used to say, if you can help, you should. The world's hard enough already." Ethan nodded, glancing back at the photo on the mantel. "Your dad sounds like he was a good man." "He was," Carla said softly, her voice laced with both pride and grief. "He always tried to teach Jaden the right values, even when things got tough." Jaden piped up, his enthusiasm cutting through the somber moment. "Mom, Mr. Reynolds said he wants to help fix the house. The roof leaks all the time, and the back door doesn't close right." "Maybe he could." "Jaden," Carla interrupted, her tone sharp. She sighed, then turned to Ethan. "Look, I appreciate the offer, but we've managed just fine. We don't need charity." Ethan met her gaze steadily. "I understand where you're coming from, but this isn't about charity. It's about doing something meaningful. Your son didn't hesitate to help me, and I'd like to honor that by doing the same for you." Carla hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the edge of the table. Jaden looked between them, his face a mix of hope and apprehension. Finally, Carla exhaled and nodded reluctantly. "All right, if you're serious, you can help with the roof. But that's it." Ethan smiled, relief washing over him. "That's a start." Jaden practically leapt out of his chair. "This is going to be awesome. Can I help too? I know where all the tools are." Carla shook her head, though a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Just stay out of trouble, Jaden." Ethan chuckled. "Don't worry, Carla. He'll be my right-hand man." As they walked outside to survey the house, Ethan couldn't shake the sense of purpose that had begun to take root within him. This wasn't just about fixing a leaky roof, it was about repairing something deeper, something that had been missing from his life for far too long. Jaden darted ahead, pointing out the trouble spots with uncontainable energy. "See? The roof over there leaks whenever it rains, and this window doesn't shut all the way. Oh, and the porch steps creak like crazy." Ethan laughed, his mood lighter than it had been in years. "All right, Jaden, one thing at a time." As they rounded the corner of the house, Carla lingered on the porch, watching them with a thoughtful expression. She crossed her arms, her gaze softening as she saw her son animated and excited. For the first time in years, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. There was so much more to be done, not just for Jaden and Carla, but for himself. The morning sun rose high over Jaden's home, casting a warm glow over the weathered siding and sagging roof. Ethan stood in the yard, surrounded by a small crew of contractors he'd called in overnight. Jaden buzzed with excitement, darting between the workers like an apprentice eager to learn. Carla lingered on the porch, her arms crossed, watching cautiously as strangers moved around her property. "All right, gentlemen," Ethan said, his voice steady as he addressed the crew. "The priority is the roof. Once that's sealed up, we'll move to the windows and porch." Greg, the foreman, nodded. "Got it, boss." Jaden tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "What about the back door? It doesn't even close right." Ethan smiled down at him. "We'll get to that too, Jaden, one step at a time." As the workers began unloading materials, Ethan glanced at Carla, still standing on the porch. She caught his gaze and gave him a small, wary nod. He understood her hesitation. Accepting help wasn't easy, especially for someone who had spent years relying only on herself. But Ethan was determined to prove this wasn't just about fixing a house, it was about building trust. The hammering started soon after, a rhythmic backdrop to the day's work. Jaden was everywhere, holding nails, passing tools, and peppering the workers with questions. His enthusiasm was infectious, drawing smiles even from the gruffest crew members. "Hey, Mr. Ethan," Jaden called, holding up a crooked nail. "Think this one's still good?" Ethan laughed, shaking his head. "I think it's had its day, Jaden. Let's stick with the new ones." Carla stepped down from the porch carrying a tray with glasses of iced tea. "Figured you all could use this," she said, her voice tentative but warm. Greg accepted a glass with a nod. "Much appreciated, ma'am." As Carla handed a glass to Ethan, their eyes met briefly. "He's really enjoying this," she said, nodding toward Jaden, who was now attempting to hammer a nail with exaggerated precision. "He's a great kid," Ethan replied sincerely. "Smart, resourceful. You've done a wonderful job raising him." Carla's lips pressed into a thin smile, a mixture of pride and grief flickering across her face. "I just hope I'm enough," she murmured. Ethan hesitated, then said softly, "You are. But even the strongest people deserve a little support now and then." Carla looked at him for a long moment before nodding. "Thank you," she said simply, and for the first time, it didn't feel like she was holding something back. As the day wore on, the work progressed steadily. The roof repairs were nearly complete, and the workers had begun sealing the drafty windows. Ethan found himself more involved than he'd expected, holding ladders, steadying beams, even hammering a few nails under Greg's watchful eye. For a man used to boardrooms and power lunches, the physical labor was strangely fulfilling. His suit jacket was replaced by a borrowed t-shirt, his polished shoes swapped for dusty work boots. The sweat on his brow and the ache in his muscles felt earned, grounding him in a way his wealth never had. Jaden, meanwhile, seemed to thrive in the chaos. At one point, he climbed up onto the porch railing, surveying the workers like a foreman. "Looking good, team," he shouted, drawing laughter from everyone, including Carla. Ethan paused to take in the scene. The laughter, the camaraderie, the warmth that seemed to radiate from this small, humble home. For years he had lived in silence, his world defined by transactions and calculated moves. Here, in the midst of sawdust and sunshine, he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, belonging. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting golden light over the yard, the crew packed up for the day. Jaden ran inside to wash up, leaving Ethan and Carla alone on the porch. The quiet was filled with the distant hum of cicadas and the soft creak of the newly repaired steps. "You didn't have to do all this," Carla said, breaking the silence. Her tone wasn't accusatory, but there was an edge of vulnerability in her words. "I know," Ethan replied, leaning against the porch railing. "But I wanted to. Your son." He reminded me of something I'd forgotten. Carla tilted her head, curiosity flickering in her eyes. "And what's that?" "That there's more to life than what I've been chasing," Ethan said, his voice steady but introspective. For years, I've been so focused on building walls, keeping people out, protecting myself. Jaden showed me that sometimes the best thing you can do is just help. Carla studied him for a moment, then nodded. He has a way of doing that, she said softly. His father was the same way, always believed in lending a hand, no matter what. Ethan hesitated, then asked, "What happened to him?" Carla's gaze drifted to the horizon. "He passed away last year. Car accident. It's been hard, but we're getting by. Jaden's tougher than I ever gave him credit for." Ethan nodded, his chest tightening. "He's a remarkable kid, and he's lucky to have you." Carla gave him a small, genuine smile. "Maybe, but today, I think we're the lucky ones." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Ethan leaned back, a quiet sense of purpose settling over him. He had come here to repay a debt, but what he found was something far more profound, a connection, a chance to be part of something real. But as the days ahead would prove, this was just the beginning of his journey. There were still challenges to face, both within and beyond the walls of this small home. And Ethan would soon learn that sometimes the hardest thing to fix isn't what's broken on the outside, but what's broken within. The days turned into weeks, and the transformation of Jaden's home was almost complete. The roof no longer leaked, the windows sealed out the cold, and the porch steps no longer creaked underfoot. Ethan had thrown himself into the project, not just financing the repairs, but working alongside the crew every day. The house was changing, but so was Ethan. He hadn't stepped foot in his office in weeks. Calls from his assistant about missed meetings and postponed deals piled up, but for once they didn't bother him. For the first time in years, he felt like his work had real meaning. On the final day of construction, the yard buzzed with activity. Neighbors had gathered, drawn by the sight of the newly painted house and the hum of workers putting on the finishing touches. Carla stood on the porch, her eyes shining with disbelief as she took it all in. "I can't believe this is our house," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Ethan smiled, wiping sweat from his brow. "You deserve it, Carla. You and Jaden." Jaden came barreling out of the house, his face glowing with excitement. "Mr. Ethan, come see my room. The desk is perfect, and the window doesn't even let the wind in anymore." Ethan laughed, following Jaden inside. The boy's room was simple but cheerful, with a sturdy wooden desk by the window, bright blue curtains and a new bed with colorful sheets. It was a far cry from the leaky, drafty space Ethan had first seen. "I'm glad you like it, Jaden," Ethan said, ruffling the boy's hair. "You've got a great spot here now." Jaden grinned. "Thanks to you." That evening, as the last of the work wrapped up, Carla invited everyone to stay for a small celebration. The kitchen table was laden with food brought by neighbors, homemade pies, casseroles, and pitchers of sweet tea. Laughter filled the air as people crowded into the newly renovated home, admiring the changes. Ethan stood in a corner, watching the scene unfold. The warmth, the sense of community, it was something he hadn't experienced in years. Carla caught his eye and walked over, handing him a plate of pie. "Not bad for a day's work, huh?" she said with a smile. Ethan chuckled. "Not bad at all." As the evening wore on, Ethan cleared his throat and stepped to the center of the room. The chatter quieted as all eyes turned to him. "I just wanted to say a few words," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "When I first came here, I thought I was just fixing a roof. But the truth is, Jaden and Carla, you've done more for me than I ever could for you." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I've spent my life chasing success, thinking it would bring me happiness. But this, being here, seeing what kindness and community can do, this is what really matters." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. He turned to Carla and Jaden, holding it out to them. "This is for you," he said. "It's a trust fund for Jaden. It's not just for college, it's for whatever dreams he wants to pursue. This house is just the beginning." Carla's hand flew to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. "Ethan, we can't." "You can," Ethan interrupted gently. "This isn't about charity, it's about giving back. Jaden reminded me what it means to care without expecting anything in return. Let me do the same. Jaden stared at the envelope, his eyes wide. You mean, I can go to college, for real? Ethan crouched down, looking Jaden in the eye. You can do anything you want, Jaden. This is your chance to dream as big as you want. For a moment, the room was silent. Then Carla stepped forward, her voice trembling. Thank you, she whispered. You've changed our lives. Ethan shook his head, his own voice thick with emotion. No, Carla. You and Jaden have changed mine. As the celebration continued, Ethan stood on the porch, gazing out at the stars. For the first time in years, he felt at peace. He had come to repay a debt, but he was leaving with something far greater, a sense of purpose, a connection, and a family he never expected. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of the ripple effect Jaden's kindness would create. The weeks that followed felt like a fresh chapter in Ethan's life. He visited Jaden and Carla often, finding himself drawn to the warmth of their home and the simple joys of their lives. The house, now sturdy and inviting, had become a symbol of renewal, not just for them, but for Ethan as well. Jaden had taken to sketching out plans for his future. His small desk, once empty, was now cluttered with notebooks filled with his ideas. Some days he talked about becoming an engineer, inspired by the construction workers he had shadowed during the repairs. Other days he dreamed of opening a community center to help other kids like himself. Ethan listened to every word, his heart swelling with pride at the boy's boundless imagination. Carla, too, seemed lighter. She had started baking more, her kitchen filling the house with a comforting aroma of pies and fresh bread. Neighbors would stop by, drawn to the changes both inside and outside the house. What once felt like an isolated corner of the world now buzzed with life and connection. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan found himself sitting on the porch with Jaden. The boy was quiet for once, his eyes fixed on the sky. Do you think I'll really make a difference someday? Jaden asked, his voice soft but laced with hope. Ethan turned to him, his expression serious. Jaden, you already have. You've changed my life, and I know you'll do the same for so many others. Jaden smiled, the kind of smile that carried both innocence and determination. I want to be like you, Mr. Ethan, helping people, giving them a chance. Ethan's chest tightened at the boy's words. He thought of his own journey, the walls he'd built, the people he'd pushed away, and how this one boy's act of kindness had broken through it all. He placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder, his voice steady. You don't need to be like me, Jaden. Just keep being you. That's more than enough. As the stars began to twinkle above, Carla joined them, carrying a tray of lemonade. She sat beside Ethan, her gaze following Jaden's as it lingered on the horizon. He's got big dreams, she said, her voice a mix of pride and awe. He's got the heart to make them real, Ethan replied. And I'll be here every step of the way. Carla looked at him, her expression softening. You've done more for us than I can put into words, Ethan. You didn't just fix a house. You gave us hope. Ethan smiled, the weight of his old life feeling distant, almost forgotten. And you reminded me of what really matters. As they sat there together, the quiet hum of the evening settling around them, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, peace. For so long his life had been defined by ambition, by an insatiable need to prove himself. But now it was defined by connection, by purpose. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. And as Jaden's laughter rang out into the night, Ethan felt ready for whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, Ethan began to notice the ripples of change spreading far beyond Jaden and Carla's small house. The neighbors, once quiet and reserved, started gathering more often, sharing meals, laughter, and ideas for improving their little community. The transformation was subtle at first, a repaired fence here, a freshly painted wall there, but soon it became impossible to ignore. Jaden's house became a hub of activity. Kids from nearby homes stopped by to see the cool new house, and Jaden, ever the gracious host, eagerly shared his room and his dreams. One day, Ethan arrived to find Jaden and a group of neighborhood kids drawing up plans for a community garden. "Mr. Ethan," Jaden called, waving a large piece of paper in the air. "What do you think? We're going to grow veggies and fruit right here in the empty lot. Mom says we can donate some to the food pantry in town." Ethan crouched beside Jaden, studying the scribbled sketches. The boy's excitement was contagious, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. "It's a great idea, Jaden, and I know just the people who can help get it started." True to his word, Ethan reached out to his contacts, connecting the kids with a team of agricultural volunteers. Within days, the once overgrown lot was cleared, and the first seeds were planted. Carla baked cookies for the workers, the kids dug in with enthusiasm, and Ethan found himself shoulder-deep in dirt, laughing like he hadn't in years. As the garden began to take shape, so did Ethan's sense of purpose. For the first time, he saw the direct impact of his efforts, not in quarterly earnings or stock valuations, but in the faces of people whose lives were better because he'd chosen to care. One afternoon, as Ethan watched Jaden and his friends place handmade signs in the garden, Carla approached him, wiping her hands on her apron. "I don't think I've ever seen him so happy," she said, her voice tinged with emotion. "You've given him more than just a new house, Ethan. You've given him a future." Ethan shook his head, his gaze fixed on Jaden. "He's the one who's given me something. He reminded me that success isn't about what you have, it's about what you give." Carla smiled, her eyes glistening. "You've got a good heart, Ethan. Maybe it just needed the right people to bring it out." As the garden flourished, so did the relationships within the community. Ethan became a familiar face in the neighborhood, not as the wealthy outsider, but as a friend. He found himself spending less time in boardrooms and more time in backyards, helping repair fences, organizing fundraisers, and mentoring Jaden. One evening, after a long day of work in the garden, Jaden approached Ethan with a notebook in hand. "Mr. Ethan, I've been thinking about something." Ethan raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "What's on your mind, Jaden?" Jaden opened the notebook, revealing pages filled with sketches and notes. "I want to start a club for kids like me, kids who don't always have someone to help them. We can teach each other stuff, like fixing things or planting gardens. What do you think?" Ethan felt a lump rise in his throat as he looked at the boy, so full of hope and determination. "I think it's a brilliant idea, Jaden, and I'll be here to help you every step of the way." That night, as Ethan drove home, he couldn't stop smiling. Jaden's vision, his courage to dream big, reminded Ethan of something he had lost along the way. His belief in the power of connection, of giving without expecting anything in return. The boy who had stopped to help a stranger on the side of the road was now inspiring an entire community, and Ethan was honored to be part of it. For the first time in years, he felt like he wasn't just living, he was truly alive. And as the lights of the city appeared on the horizon, Ethan knew one thing for certain: this was only the beginning. Together, he and Jaden were going to change the world, one small act of kindness at a time. Months had passed since the last nail was hammered into Jaden and Carla's newly transformed home. The garden Jaden had envisioned had flourished into a vibrant patch of life, brimming with tomatoes, squash, and rows of sunflowers that swayed gently in the breeze. Neighbors often gathered there, sharing stories, laughter, and the harvest. It had become more than a garden. It was a symbol of how one small act of kindness could grow into something extraordinary. Ethan visited frequently, his once luxurious penthouse in the city, now feeling like a distant memory. The sleek walls and cold silence of that life had been replaced by dirt under his nails, the hum of children's laughter, and a renewed sense of belonging. His presence in the community was no longer a novelty but a norm. People waved when they saw him, children called out to him by name, and he found himself offering advice, not on mergers and acquisitions, but on repairing fences or starting small projects. One cool autumn evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat on the garden's edge, watching Jaden lead a group of kids through a small project. They were building a wooden bench from reclaimed wood, a gift for a neighbor who had recently lost her husband. The boy's enthusiasm was infectious, his voice carrying across the garden as he explained each step. "Make sure the nails go in straight, okay? We want this to last a long time." Jaden's voice was filled with purpose, and Ethan couldn't help but smile. Carla walked over, a mug of tea in each hand. She handed one to Ethan and sat beside him, her gaze following Jaden as he worked. "He's amazing," Ethan said quietly. "He's got this spark. Like he sees the world for what it could be, not just what it is." Carla nodded, a soft smile playing on her lips. "That's his father in him. Always believed you could change the world one small step at a time. Jaden's just picking up where he left off." Ethan stared into his tea, his voice thoughtful. "He's already changed mine." Carla turned to him, her expression warm. "You've changed ours too, Ethan. You gave us more than a house or a garden. You gave us a second chance. And you gave Jaden the tools to dream bigger than this little corner of the world." Ethan smiled, though his chest felt heavy with emotion. "He gave me something too. He reminded me that life isn't about what you take, it's about what you give." As the evening deepened, the group of kids finished their project, standing back to admire their work. Jaden called Ethan over, his face glowing with pride. "What do you think, Mr. Ethan? It's pretty good, right?" Ethan crouched down, inspecting the bench. It was sturdy, carefully crafted despite the kids' amateur skills. "It's not just good, Jaden. It's perfect." Jaden grinned, his excitement bubbling over. "We're giving it to Mrs. Harris tomorrow. She said she didn't need anything, but I think she'll like this." "She'll love it," Ethan said. "And she'll remember the kindness behind it every time she sits on it." As the night wore on, the group dispersed, and Ethan found himself alone in the garden with Jaden. The boy sat beside him, his hands still dusty from the day's work. "You think I'll be able to do it, Mr. Ethan?" Jaden asked, his voice quiet. "Make a difference like my dad did?" Ethan looked at him, his heart swelling with pride. "You're already making a difference, Jaden. You've inspired this whole community, and I have no doubt you'll do even more." Jaden smiled, his gaze drifting to the stars overhead. "I want to help as many people as I can, like you helped us." Ethan chuckled softly. "It's funny, Jaden. I thought I was the one helping you, but it turns out you're the one who helped me." The boy tilted his head, curious. "How?" "You reminded me that kindness isn't just about helping others, it's about healing yourself too. And you gave me the chance to do that." Jaden nodded, his young mind processing the weight of Ethan's words. After a moment, he smiled again, a smile filled with hope and determination. "I'm gonna keep going, Mr. Ethan, one small step at a time." Ethan placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder, his voice steady. "And I'll be here every step of the way." As the stars twinkled above, Ethan felt something he hadn't in years. Peace, purpose, and a sense of belonging he never thought he'd find. The boy who had stopped to help him on a dusty road had changed his life. Not with grand gestures, but with simple, selfless kindness. This wasn't the end of their story, it was just the beginning. Together they would keep building gardens, benches, communities, and most importantly, hope. Because sometimes all it takes to change the world is one small act of kindness. Thank you for listening to this heartwarming journey of kindness, transformation, and hope. What do you think about Ethan and Jaden's story? Did it resonate with you? If you love this story, drop a 2 in the comments. If it didn't quite meet your expectations, leave a 7. Your feedback helps us improve and bring you better stories. And don't forget to subscribe to Elderly Wisdom, a channel where stories like this remind us that it's never too late to learn, grow, and connect. Let's keep spreading kindness one story at a time. Hit the notification bell so you never miss an inspiring tale. Thank you for being part of our community. Until next time, take care and remember, a small act of kindness can change someone's world, and maybe even your own.